This is my 2023 Honda XR150L, and this is the Yamaha TW200. And this is a side-by-side comparison of the two. Let's take a look at what makes the TW200 and the XR150 similar and the ways in which they're different. The Yamaha TW200 is a 196cc carbureted motorcycle that's been available for sale in the United States since the late 1980s. It's only ever received one major update, and that came in 2001 when Yamaha did away with the original kickstart start option and added an electric start. Yamaha during this update also added a front disc brake to the motorcycle, and they also changed the motorcycle's charging system from 35 watt to 55 watt. There have been small changes in different model years and parts that have changed throughout, but nothing as major as the 2001 update. This is a post-2001 motorcycle because it does have the disc brake and it does only have an electric start. In addition to the 196cc carbureted engine, the TW200 has a front disc brake and a rear drum brake. It has a 5-speed manual transmission. It has an 18-inch front wheel and a 14-inch rear wheel. It has 6.3 inches of front suspension travel and 5.9 inches of rear suspension travel, and it has a 1.8 gallon fuel tank with a 0.4 gallon reserve. It has no LED headlights, it has no fuel gauge, and it has a very basic display. As I said before, it has a very basic display, as does the XR150L. You can see that it just has the speedometer and trip and total odometers. It has a turn signal indicator, a high beam indicator, and then a neutral light indicator as well. It is electric start only at this point. It has a high and low beam switch, turn signal, and the horn. The fuel tank is right here, along with the fuel cap. This model has a rack that it does not come stock with, and it has aftermarket suspension that was done by Cogent Dynamics. And again, a big thank you to Rick for letting me use this for this video. And while the wheels on it are technically smaller diameter than the XR150L, the volume is much larger. The volume of the rear tire is, I would imagine, almost twice what the XR150's rear tire volume is. This is going to let you run lower pressures, and in turn this is going to give you better traction, and it's going to absorb bumps a little bit better in addition to its suspension. The Honda XR150L is a 149cc carbureted motorcycle that's brand new to the United States for 2023. However, it's not brand new to the rest of the world, and it has been sold in both the South American and Asian markets for roughly the last 15 years. It has a disc brake front wheel and a drum brake rear wheel. That's paired with a 19-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear wheel. It has 7.1 inches of front suspension travel and 5.9 inches of rear suspension travel. It has a 2.8 gallon fuel tank with a 0.9 gallon reserve, but it does not have any bells or whistles, and it has no LED lights, it has no fuel gauge, and it has only the most basic of displays. And you can see just how basic the display is. We have a total odometer, a trip odometer, our turn signal indicator, a high beam light, and a neutral indicator as well. In addition to that, all of the controls are very basic. We have our high and low beam switch, we have a turn signal, our horn, and then we have our kill switch and our starter. No frills, it's all very basic. Additionally, the XR150 will come with a rear rack from the factory. However, it does not come with a skid plate. The skid plate that you see here is an aftermarket accessory that I've added. However, you can see the difference in the rear tire. The XR150 has standard motorcycle tires, and you can see that they're much narrower in comparison to the TW200s. The XR150 has an MSRP of $2,971, and the TW200's MSRP is $4,899. The XR150 has a saddle height of 32.8 inches, and the TW has a saddle height of 31.1 inches. It has 10.4 inches of ground clearance, whereas the XR150 has 9.5 inches of ground clearance. And so you may be wondering, how do these two motorcycles compare to one another? Well, let's get them out on the pavement and see how they do, and then we'll take them down some dirt roads and test them there as well, and get a better idea of how these motorcycles are similar and how they're different. Let's go. So right now we're on a road that, depending on the time of day, can have moderate traffic, and often people are going above the 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. Right now I'm currently going above the speed limit with the TW200 with ease. This motorcycle does not have any issue getting up to speed or going the speed limit. In a lot of ways it feels very tractor-ish, in the same way that like a KLR 650 does, which is it feels torquey through the lower gears, through like 1 and 2, and by the time you get up to like 3, 4, I mean, you're cruising. I mean, you don't really have anything to worry about other than maintaining speed. And this doesn't have any issues, at least so far, from what I can tell. But we're gonna hop onto the Blue Ridge Parkway and we're going to ride up towards Mount Pisgah. And so we will be going uphill almost the entire time. And there's some steep grades, maybe almost up to 10%. And that's gonna give us like it's gonna give us a fairly accurate indicator of how this does on some pretty steep terrain. So let's just hang in there for a second while I hop on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So we are cruising to one of the steeper sections here as we go up. And I have lost a little bit of speed. I can still accelerate a little bit with the motorcycle, but it takes it a little bit of time to gain that speed. It's to be expected for a 200cc motorcycle. It's not a 1200cc adventure bike. There's no blipping the throttle and you're gonna zip away. That's not what this is. It's very much in the same category as the XR150. And it's gonna be, if you wanna go fast, you're gonna have to be a little bit strategic. I would say that in my initial impression of this, it definitely is faster than the XR150. On flats, I'd say it probably can gain another 10 miles per hour over top of the XR150. But really where it shines is on long inclines. The 150, not that it bogs down, but it has no more to give. This can give just a little bit more, right? It can give just that tiny little bit more, and therefore it can go a little bit faster up hills and on the flats. Alright, the headlight is pretty bright. That's not bad. Nice. You know, the other thing I'm surprised about on the pavement is these big volume tires. I thought for sure that these big tires would maybe feel a little bit awkward rolling around some of these corners at speed. No, not at all. If anything, they feel more planted. I come from the bicycle world, and so one of the things in the bike world is fat bikes. And fat bikes are bikes that have a tire bigger than 4 inches in diameter. And then the max being like 5 inches wide. And this is the fat bike of the motorcycle world. This is obviously because of the size of the tires, but the feel is the same. Like leaning into a corner when you're going fast, it feels just like it does riding a fat bike, mountain bike. It's really, really an interesting feeling. And honestly, it feels good. Like, I like it. I like it a lot. I didn't think that it's not that I thought that I wouldn't. It's just that I thought it might feel strange, but it feels very natural switching between the XR150 and the TW200. An interesting thing to note with this motorcycle is the fact that the seat is definitely lower than the XR150 and the CT125. The CT125 has a saddle height of 31.5 inches. The XR150 has a saddle height of 32.8 inches. And the TW200 has a saddle height of 31.1 inches. For my friends around the globe, I do not know what that is in metric. I do not have a conversion thing in front of me here. But that is low. But it's strange because when you sit on it, like, I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'2". I have very long legs. Like, when I sit on this motorcycle, I do not feel cramped. It does not feel small. It's like the way that the tank is shaped, it comes up, right? And the way that it comes up lets your legs grab it still. It's narrow, so you don't feel like you're tucked in and up. It has a flat seat or a sloping seat, but no rise in it like the XR150 has. And therefore, I can slide all the way back. I can slide forward into the pocket. It feels very comfortable. It's quite surprising because the difference getting on one versus the other is apparent in terms of the height, but it doesn't feel any less comfortable, if that makes sense. So I pulled off on the side of the Blue Ridge Parkway here. This is where I filmed my initial impressions video of the XR150L, and this is just a beautiful spot, but I just wanted to stop and look at this motorcycle because this is such a great little pack mule. This thing is such a cool little motorcycle. I really love the rear rack that the owner Rick has put on this thing. Cogent Dynamics designs suspension stuff, and basically their stuff is inside of the fork, and they have replaced the rear shock with their own. So they have a really cool setup here, and I think that it's just awesome. It rides great, it feels great. Look at this rear tire. There is so much volume to that. It's just insane. It looks like an ATV tire. Probably because it almost is. So spoiler alert for you folks, I will not be riding any single track on this because of where I live. I live right by Bent Creek, which is where we will be riding, and it is illegal for anything motorized, including e-bikes, to be on the gated trails. Therefore, I can only ride the main road, which is Bent Creek Gap Road. So for those of you that comment and say, oh, you got to take it on single track, you got to take it on single track, I would love to. It's just I don't have anything accessible near me. At some point down the road, hopefully I'll get a chance to. But just so you guys know, I am only heading towards a dirt road right now. So let's go. Let's just monkey around for a second before we hop on. It feels great. It accelerates great. Alright, so we are rolling into Bent Creek Gap. It's really cool that we can access this from the Blue Ridge Parkway. Alright, let's see. How does this thing do standing? Honestly, standing, this feels very good. I feel very comfortable. I'm a tall guy again, but, you know, it doesn't feel obnoxiously short or anything. Let's ride down Wash Creek Road here, as if we're going towards Yellow Gap Road. If you don't know what Yellow Gap Road is, if you're not from Asheville, you should check out my video of riding the CT125 across it. It's a really beautiful road. Almost the gateway into Pisgah National Forest from the Asheville side of things. So the GoPro video isn't going to do this any justice, but this edge of the road is quite choppy. There's a bunch of rocks sticking up. This road just takes a beating because of how much rain we get here. Some washboards. Alright, let's swing this around. Head on back up the road here. I don't know, I'm speechless. This is really good. This is a really good motorcycle. Alright, so we're back at Bent Creek Gap, and we are going to cruise on down through Bent Creek. I could see this being a really fun bike to do like Smoky Mountain 500 on. I'm sure there's some people that have done the Trans-America Trail on this. I'd be curious to see more of the accessories that they make for the TW200. I'm sure that there's some good ones. This rack is really nice. I'm sure that there's some other options along those lines. And you can see this is the real bumpy, not super technical, but just chunky, loose, muddy section of straight downhill down this service road, and this thing just rolls. XR150, I probably would have had to brake a little bit down through that just to keep control of the bike, but this thing just tracks straight, man. It's kind of the way that my mind works, but I'm also curious what kind of options there are for tires. Surely there can't be that many options for tires in the size of the rear. It's a 14-inch rim, and that tire, I don't even know the width, but it's incredibly wide. There can't be that many options available. I could see that maybe being a potential downside. If you have a TW200, or you've done the research into tires for them, drop me a comment below and let me know, because the more I'm riding this, the more I'm like, I think I need one. But that's definitely something I would be worried about for myself. Alright guys, we are back on pavement. So that was Bent Creek. Just a good little loop to do to get acquainted with a bike. I like to do that one a lot. I gotta say, I'm very impressed by the TW200. This is a really good motorcycle. I like the seating position. Being a taller guy, it does not feel small in any way. It doesn't feel like I'm cramped or, you know, anything like that. I've got room to slide back around. I can stand quite comfortably and have a lot of control of the motorcycle still. It gets really good gas mileage. It's powerful enough to get up the steepest grades on the Blue Ridge Parkway and the steepest grades through Bent Creek and other places like that. I'm sure that it would fare quite well on single track, and I'm sure that it would fare quite well for work on like a farm or something like that. I think this would be a really excellent bike for somebody that maybe wants a dual sport that's a little bit shorter, a little more accessible and easier to get onto, something with a lower saddle height where you could put both of your feet on the ground and still be comfortable, but something that could still keep up with your friends that are maybe on something bigger, like a KLR 650, DR 650, XR 650, something in that range. I think you'd still be fine riding with them off-road, unless of course they're pinning it, then they're gonna have, you know, way more power. But the point is, this is a great motorcycle, and there's tons of aftermarket support for it. It has been sold in the United States virtually in the same form, with the exception of the disc brake and the kickstarter changing in 2001, but it's basically the same motorcycle, and so there is so many accessories that you can get. And there are companies like Cogent Dynamics making aftermarket suspension for it, and that is such an awesome perk to this motorcycle. There is so much support. I'm sure that if you go on the internet and you look and just do a simple Google search, you're gonna find just forum after forum full of people with these motorcycles. So I think that it would be a solid buy. Alright, so now we are hopping on the XR150, and we're gonna go take the same exact route. We're gonna ride up the parkway a good bit, and then we're gonna ride down into Mills River and then back up and over Bent Creek Gap and down into Bent Creek. Okay, so we rode the TW200 first, and now I just hopped onto the Blue Ridge Parkway, the same section I rode the TW200 on. I'm going to ride the same section of Parkway and the same section of dirt that I rode the TW on. And the first thing that I noticed with the XR150 is that it has nowhere near the power to accelerate uphill that the TW200 does. It is definitely a more powerful motorcycle. That 50 cc's does make a difference, and it's very apparent, especially on a steep grade like this. Now the TW couldn't just zip away, but it definitely could gain some momentum as you laid on the throttle, and the XR just doesn't have that. I'm in 5th gear right now, pinned, and I can't really go past 45, and that's going up probably what's about at the steepest 10% grade. One of the things that's very apparent in contrast to the TW200 is just how much smoother this motorcycle is. Not in terms of its suspension, but in terms of the transmission. It's a much smoother shifting motorcycle than the TW200. The TW feels very tractor-like in nature, and this does not. This is much more refined. The other thing that I noticed is just how much more powerful the front disc brake on the XR150 is versus the front disc brake on the TW200. Now, they are about the same weight, and I have to take a look at what the rotor size is. I'll drop it right here. But the braking performance from the XR is much better than that of the TW200. Both the front disc brake and rear drum brake feel more powerful. Now granted, that could be that this is a newer motorcycle, but truly it's very noticeable up top. The other thing I'll say is the headlight on this is much brighter, especially in dark conditions like a tunnel like this, on the XR150 than on the TW. Small things, but they do add up. After riding the TW, it's also very noticeable how much taller this motorcycle is in terms of its actual seating position. I feel much more upright in this position. I feel like I'm much higher, but I think the downside to that is it feels like I'm getting more wind on my chest. It could be that it's windier out, which it is, but it could also be the fact that I'm sitting higher than the motorcycle, where on the TW I was a little bit lower. There was a little bit more of me shielded by the dash and everything, so that's something to consider as well. You can buy some sort of aftermarket windscreen for both, but that's just something to keep in mind as well, something that I did notice switching from the TW back to the XR150. If you're considering either of these motorcycles to use for adventure riding, one of the things I want to impress upon you is that the tank on the XR150 is 2.8 gallons total, whereas the tank on the TW200 is 1.8 gallons. And on top of that, the XR150 is getting better gas mileage. It's supposedly supposed to get 125 miles per gallon, which maybe it does in places where it's flat, but I'm averaging about 100 miles per gallon. From everything that I've read about the TW, and I didn't have it long enough to test this, but it's getting about 70 to 80 miles per gallon. So you're getting drastically more range out of the tank on the XR150 than you are out of the tank on the TW200. So I just rode up to where I pulled off with the TW200, and it is absolutely beautiful out. This motorcycle does not have the same amount of power when pointed uphill, and especially when it's steep, but it's a much more comfortable motorcycle. The seat is a lot more plush. It's a much more upright seating position, and if you're tall like I am, you're going to really enjoy those things about it. One of the things that I think that would benefit this would be having aftermarket bars that rise a little bit more. The TW has some Pro Taper bars on it that are not stock. They're aftermarket, but definitely a worthwhile upgrade to the motorcycle. I think that we're going to take this down into Mills River and Bent Creek on the dirt roads, just like we did with the TW, and I can talk a little bit about my experience that I have with this motorcycle, especially when riding it on dirt. I have in total of my 600 miles I've put on it since purchasing it, probably about 250 miles of dirt road riding on it, and I can give you just a little bit better of an idea of what I really like about it and where it really shines. So let's head on down there, but first we'll romp around on the same stuff we romped around on with the TW. Just a quick little play thing. Not really supposed to be messing around here, but when in Rome, right? Conditions are about the same as they were. There's been some rain that moved through, so maybe it's a little bit tackier, but that shouldn't affect this comparison too much. So right up top, what I can tell you is, because this does not have the big volume tires that the TW does, this is noticeably bumpier. It also does not have a suspension upgrade, and so it is not as dampened as the TW is. It's still rideable, but if you're going to be on miles and miles of bumpy terrain, that's just something you're going to want to keep in mind. So I've ridden this about 600 miles in total, as I said before, and about 200 miles of that has been on dirt road. I want to repeat, I will not be doing any single track in this video, as there's no legal single track immediately near me. But stay tuned, because down the road I will be taking this to one of the OHV areas. Of the 250 miles that I've ridden this on dirt, what I've found is that these stock tires suck. I thought that they were going to be okay, and they are, as long as you're conscious with pressure and lower them down and have some sort of inflator to bring them back up when you're on pavement. But in dry conditions, the stock tires are junk, and they will be replaced on mine by Shinko 244s. A knobbier off-road tire is going to be your best friend, especially on this thing. One of the things I really dig about this motorcycle off-road is the saddle. And I mentioned before that the saddle is more comfortable and that it's plusher, but it really is. I mean, the one on the TW is quite firm and there's no shape to it. Some people don't like the shape of the one on the XR. I really like it. It helps keep you planted in your position. You're tucked into this pocket, and you're not going to slide around on the saddle, especially over big bumpy obstacles and terrain. The other thing is the way that it sits up, to me, feels a lot like a mountain bike. And I can really get over this front end here to take it where I want to go. So one of the things I had mentioned was how smooth the XR150 is in comparison to the TW200. And in the 250 miles that I've ridden this motorcycle off-road, it's very apparent to me, especially when talking about how buzzy it gets at high RPMs. And the TW is very buzzy. You feel it in your hands, you feel it in your feet, you can see it. The mirrors buzz almost non-stop in any gear at any RPM. And the XR150 just does not do that. You can see right now the mirror is quite still, other than the bumps of the road that I'm going down. I never feel it through my feet with the stock foot pegs on, and I can only feel it through my hands a little bit. Really nowhere near as noticeable as it is on the TW200, so it's much smoother in that regard. One of the other things in the time that I've ridden this on dirt roads is that it stops really well. For just having a front disc and rear drum with, no ABS, it's very controllable off-road.
I never feel like I'm going to slide out through a corner. It never feels like I'm out of control of it. Even with narrower bars, like the stock bars, I feel very much in control of this motorcycle. I definitely felt in control of the TW in the tests that I did, but I just don't have the same amount of mileage underneath me on it. But I will say that the aftermarket bars on it were a nice upgrade, and they're a bit wider, and they have a contour that swoops back. So that's definitely something that's in the cards that I'm going to do to this down the road. And you can tell the difference in the volume of the tires through technical things. As I said before, this is that long, bumpy downhill with some bigger potholes through it, and it's just a little much to not touch the brake through on this motorcycle. You have to be a lot more aware of your line choices with this motorcycle, I think, is what I'm trying to say. I also want to point out that the rack on the TW was not a stock option. That is an aftermarket accessory that was added either by Rick or the previous owner, and the TW does not come with a rack from the factory, whereas the XR150 does. It comes with this nice big rear rack, but the TW comes with a skid plate, whereas the XR150 does not. So you have a little bit of a trade-off there. And while we're on the topic of skid plates, it is important to note that the TW200 does have 1 inch more of ground clearance than the XR150 does at 10.5 inches, whereas the XR150 has 9.5 inches of ground clearance. So maybe the XR150 isn't the ideal single track slayer like the TW, but it definitely is going to be better for commuting and maybe dirt road options.
And in conclusion, how do the Yamaha TW200 and the Honda XR150L compare to one another? Well, the answer to that question is that they occupy a very similar space in the same category of low displacement dual sport motorcycles. Both are under 200 cc's, both have 5-speed manual transmissions, and both have disc brake front wheels and drum brake rear wheels. Neither of these motorcycles has any bells or whistles. There's no LED lights. There's no fuel gauges. They have very, very basic displays. Both are under 300 pounds and in fact are within 4 pounds of one another according to the manufacturers, and both have moderate amount of suspension. The TW200 has 6.3 inches of front travel and 5.9 inches of rear travel, whereas the XR150 has 7.1 inches of front travel and 5.9 inches of rear travel. The TW has a 1.8 gallon fuel tank, and the XR150 has a 2.8 gallon fuel tank. Both the Yamaha TW200 and the Honda XR150L are fantastic motorcycles. But you might be asking yourself which one of these motorcycles is better for you. Well, the answer to that question is going to be based off of what you want to do with the motorcycle. The TW200 is arguably the better motorcycle for riding on single track and anything that requires navigating obstacles or retaining traction on loose, unpredictable surfaces. The XR150L is more aimed at commuting and light off-road use in its stock form. It can absolutely do all of the things the TW200 can off-road, but it will require aftermarket accessories such as a skid plate, knobby tires, and so on. The TW200 can do all of the things that the XR150 can on-road, but it will require smoother on-road oriented tires, and it's not going to get the same gas mileage as the XR150L. However, it has more power and is going to be able to give you a better ride through busy traffic or take you up steep inclines a little bit faster than the XR150L can. And when deciding whether or not these motorcycles are right for you, you're undoubtedly considering the price. The MSRP of the TW200 is $4,899, whereas the MSRP of the XR150L is $2,971. The TW200 is almost $2,000 more expensive than the XR150L. Yes, it's been sold since the late 1980s, and yes, it has a reputation for being a reliable, awesome motorcycle. But when all you're getting is a motorcycle that was made in Japan, that has an engine that's 50 cc's bigger than its competitor, I'm not sure that it's worth it. It's going to be up to you and what you're looking for from the motorcycle that decides that. In my case, I wanted a fantastic commuter that I could customize the way that I wanted it to, so that I could use it in the off-road application of my choosing. That may not be best for you, but you can decide what is. Regardless of which motorcycle you choose, you will be getting a motorcycle that you can customize and make your own and use to explore the world around you. How you choose to do that is up to you, but with either of these options, you can't go wrong. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and a huge shout out to Rick from Cogent Dynamics for letting me borrow his TW200. If you have a TW200, please check out their website. They make a bunch of suspension stuff for a bunch of different models of dual sport motorcycles. Check them out, see if there's anything you like. Thank you for watching.